Well, welcome back. Um, back to this amusement park. Last episode we were talking about dodgeball, and we got past that. We just talk about how society um, can't allow kids to just beat the snot out of each other, so they have to kind of create like alternative platforms because we're a very warlike people, I mean, heck, you got to see him R2D2 dressed as an army soldier. That's actually accurate, that we're a very warlike society, We always have to create like excuses why we go to war. Even the Russia, how they went to war with the Ukraine. They had to kind of essentially say, well, oh, that we were denazifying them and all that, and doing all these things, and then it's like, well, basically it shows no, you just want to take over that land, really, and same old history, repeating and repeating. And we're playing this ride. Of course, I wouldn't probably take this ride on an empty stomach. And yeah, I mean, yeah, the '90s. I've been going through, and nostalgically, you always look back at different decades you lived, and the '90s was a very strange time. Like the mid '90s was generally fairly awful, and mainly was because everything in entertainment and look, man, when we judge things, yeah, we judge things through entertainment because that's how we keep our sanity, But a lot of things were just basically just in a slump in the entertainment industry in the mid '90s, it didn't matter if it was late night TV. It didn't matter if it was, and sometimes, in the summer, I mean, yeah, I watched a lot of David Letterman, so yeah, but even he wasn't quite as funny as he was in the past. And a lot of things were just not as good as they used to be, the movies were becoming very, very censored and very watered down. And I mean, yeah, you had like movies like Forrest Gump, and you had good movies, like that, and eventually Apollo 13, and you had the good stuff like that, and I would say Forrest Gump was probably the best movie ever made in the '90s. I mean, that was like great stuff, but you know. But the problem was is in the '90s, like wrestling was having a slump, the really bad slump at that, and it was just sort of like what worked in the '80s and '70s and '80s. It was sort of like people kind of got burned out on it, and they just, like even the arcades were suffering. And it was like, yeah, the fighting games were doing good, but after a while, that was the only thing they were willing to make because they said, well, the kids like fighting games. That's about it. And everyone was going through a slump. The 2000s was kind of like an extension of the '90s, where like some people I heard that they claim, well, the '90s was supposed to be an apology of like the '80s or something. The '80s had went too far. Well, I actually argued that, well, the '90s was. I mean, there was a lot of that still. I mean, like in comic books, you had the girls with the big boobs and the twisted spines and things like that. I mean, it was, very sexual overdrive and everything, back then. Now it's like kind of like the opposite, where it's sort of like because there's so much woke, everything's so woke and so much cancel culture that it's kind of like entertainment's not sure what to do. Like, so what it is all they can do is they create now entertainment that just if you're born a male, you're essentially screwed because most of the entertainment is saying how that's a possible brain fracture right there, big skull fracture. I don't think you would make your ride to have the thing be that close to that. That would be frightening. Um, you, you know, it's about commentating over 10 minutes takes a lot longer. You're like, it's funny. I would think like it doesn't take that long. Actually, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to commentate over this stuff. Um, but yeah, the woke culture, while is very sanitized, it's very. See, in the mid '90s, though, things were getting very bland too. Like, it's still kind of. It was over sex, but it was kind of very censored. Like, I remember Schumacher mentioning when he was making Batman, which was generally considered the worst years of Batman, and understand Schumacher was the guy who made Falling Down, though. You know, I didn't say that movies in the '90s sucked. There was good movies. There was very good movies, good action movies, good everything. But the problem is when you got to TV and stuff, but not everything. Like the stuff that though Hollywood considered to be family friendly, that's where you got screwed on, and you got like a super sanitized version, and that's what happened to Schumacher. He couldn't even make Batman without it being super sanitized. They pretty much wanted, Batman to be just absolutely, pretty much, they pretty much want to take it back to the Adam West days. Not to say I didn't like that. I mean, look, man, I got an omnibus, a DC omnibus of what Batman was like in the late 50s. I'll tell you, it's awful. It's awful. You would think, well, what do you mean? It probably has Batman and Robin taking on criminals and the Joker. Well, maybe a little bit, but it's mostly like Batman visits Mars, or, like stupid stories, a lot of stupid science fiction stories, because like by that point then because of the comic book approval code and stuff, they just couldn't do anything. They had to just have the most dumbest, goofiest stories. Like Superman wakes up and he's got a lion's head. And it's like, but actually the more Weisinger Superman stuff was actually really fun though. I actually got black and white reprints of it, and then eventually there is an omnibus coming out of that stuff too. They'll be in full color, and I actually am excited about that stuff. But yeah. So, Chris, in that omnibus, I'm gonna have to see what it covers to see how much. I have about 4 volumes of Showcase that. Of black and white DC's Showcase that cover that stuff. That basically covers from like 1959 Superman all the way up to 1964, which is really cool. But it's kind of crazy times because they weren't allowed to do violent stories and whatever, Well, the episode's just about over. Like I said, it's crazy the amount of brain power to keep yourself busy to commentate over a 10-minute episode. It's so much better when I have other characters. I'm not going to admit it with these solo shows. They're hard. I have to kind of keep myself, commentating over things. It's so much easier when there's storylines and, you got Mr. Packer, you got different characters, and we still got a lot more of this, the year's not over yet, hopefully I don't know. I hope I get out of this virtual world, go back to that stuff. Well, see you guys.